Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for all the hard work. This has been a really great 3 days, and I'm glad I can offer some kind of a contribution to all that we've heard, all that we're still hearing right now. Um, this is what I'm going to be talking about today. As Barbara mentioned, it's ongoing work in progress. It's trying to think through or put two groups that don't often maybe encounter or talk to one another into conversation. So thinking about unhoused communities across Tokyo in some different locations in the city, and then trying to set that alongside these broadly disseminated assertions on what the near future is supposedly going to look like, or what we are often told it will look like. So that's what I'm trying to set up right now. I think you'll notice that I'm an academic, so I'm evidently allergic to time limits. So I'll do my best to navigate that a bit. And I'm going to make several jumps as I do this. So hopefully those jumps will, at the end, make everything somewhat clear. I want to start with somebody, I'm guessing most of us know who she is. This is, of course, Governor Koike, well-known figure in Tokyo, long-standing governor. And if you've been following some of what the governor says, you might have noticed that lately some of her favorite things to say is that she is working, her staff is working to lead Tokyo forward in the creation of a, quote, city where no one is left behind. Sometimes she also likes to frame this as devoting all efforts to become a city where people shine. You're going to notice shine is going to come up several times. That is clearly a word that is a favorite. We see this in policy speeches, we see it in memos, reports, the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, which are going to make several appearances while I'm speaking, but a lot of the material that speaks to what she and her staff are doing to comply with that often makes reference to Tokyo as a city where no one was left behind, Tokyo as a city where people can shine. Now, we should, of course, be careful. As is often the case with material like this, they're often somewhat scant on substance, but far more rich in jargon, in buzzwords, and a lot of lofty promises. To that extent, then, I think we can regard these statements, and I'm going to argue that they traffic, frankly, in the absurd, in that they are farcical, misleading assertions that are at their core intended more to distract instead of do what they claim they are doing. You can call me skeptical, you can call me cynical, but I don't believe the governor actually wants to bring about a Tokyo of comprehensive, hope-filled equality. I would love to be wrong about that, but I'm skeptical. The other person I want to introduce alongside Governor Koike is far less well known. I'm going to call him Kazukun. He's one of the people in the larger photo. That's not me. And he's one of a steady group of volunteers who do outreach work for and with Tokyo's unhoused, various impoverished communities. And one of the primary duties that Kazukun undertakes when he's not in moments like that is bread making at a Kodomo Shokudo. Kodomo Shokudo, children's cafeterias, are facilities. There's quite a lot of them. They've sprung up a lot throughout the country. I'll say more about the numbers in just a second. His is near Ikebukuro. And at his particular Kodomo Shokudo, they make several hundred rolls, other pieces of bread every week. They also do onigiri, they do bento. They sometimes have people in to eat meals in the facility, but they make a lot of food that goes out. So they really do try every week to feed as many of Tokyo's hungry and unhoused as they are equipped to do. And in doing this, I would also argue they are doing future-oriented work. And future-oriented work that would seemingly fit very neatly with the goals, the assertions, and the vision being put forward by Governor Koike, as well as her political and corporate sponsors. But I also think you would probably recognize that that's a somewhat ridiculous statement, that those two things probably don't maybe line up all that well. And that instead, the reality is that many Tokyoites are being left behind, and they are also being erased, often deliberately erased, from consideration. And to entertain this, let's consider two sets of numbers. Last year, the Ministry of Health, Labor, and Welfare released a study. And in this study, they declared that Japan has exactly 3,065 unhoused individuals in the entire country. Incredible level of precision. They have, and we can further break them down, 2,788 men, 167 women, 110 of an undetermined sex, 770 of them are in Tokyo, 888 are in Osaka. Some prefectures have 0. Now, this is a comically low number, and it is born of a deliberately restrictive methodology. I'm not going to get into too much of that today, but certainly feel free to ask me about it afterwards. That is intended more than anything else to distract, because we can also put that number in conversation with another number. Kodomo Shokudo first started to appear in Japan in around 2012. Several dozen, then several hundred. Last year, there were more than 9,000. There is a clear, obvious, evident need. Hunger is a pervasive issue. More and more people are struggling. More and more people are being left behind in some capacity. That takes me back very directly to Kazukun. During one of the first sessions that I volunteered with, with them and his group to make bread, there's a lot of downtime when you're making bread. You need the dough, you wait, you do these kinds of things. So there's a lot of time for conversation. And I mentioned I had this research interest in how the future is framed in Japan, how we are given certain visions of what's to come. And I also mentioned that I'd been increasingly intrigued by Japan's interest in the prominence of the SDGs. And as soon as I mentioned this, Kazukun kind of got a bit of a naughty look in his eye, got a little excited. And he immediately said, "You mean the BS SDGs?" You know what I mean, yes. He then very quickly produced this laminated card that you see here. Now this down here is the official UN, downloaded off their website, Sustainable Development Goals. And you notice there's 17. 17 doesn't fit very well. I'm not a graphic designer, neither is Kazukun, but both of us agreed that this looks a little weird. And so he decided to add another one. So this is Kazukun's version with an 18th SDG, Kodomo Shokudo for everyone. And he's quick to point out that there are other goals that deal with this, no poverty, zero hunger. In some ways there are meaningful points of overlap, but he says Kodomo Shokudo for everyone is different. It's about sociality, it's about coming together, it's about people being in communion and eating together with one another. And it's something that he thinks was somewhat neglected. So we have our first tension, and with that tension in mind, I want to make our first jump. We're going to move from individuals and the statements they make to an actual physical location. This is Mitake Park. Mitake Park is probably, even for the most long-tenured Tokyo resident, not a place you're that familiar with. It's a small and frankly kind of unremarkable, or was a small and frankly kind of unremarkable park in Shibuya. Mitake closed in December of 2022. You can see where it is right there. And since its closure, it has been a construction site. I'm going to try to go there later on today and see what it looks like right now. It's the site of a new building. It's going to be sort of a mixed use. There's going to be office, retail, maybe some apartments on some of the higher floors. And there's going to still be a park, in that there will be green area in front. But we have a piece of land that until December of 2022 was a publicly accessible park that had an unhoused community that resided in it, that has now become a space with exclusionary possibilities. Exclusionary possibilities tied to the photo you see there. I said this is Mitake Park, but you see it says Little Miyashita Garden. That's in reference to another far better known, I think, place in Tokyo. This is Miyashita Park. Some of us have likely probably been there. It's a shopping complex. It's not too far away. It's right over here, actually. It opened in 2020. The original Miyashita Park that sat there closed in 2017 and was the source of another displacement. The soil in this box came from Miyashita Park when the gardener who tends it was initially displaced to Mitake. So we see then a trend that has started to emerge. Miyashita has gotten quite a lot of attention and celebration for its architecture, for restoring a level of vibrance to a particular area, although it's filled with stores that I can't afford to shop in. On the roof, however, what remains of the park looks largely like this. You have reservation and fee-based facilities, so a beach volleyball court that you have to, pay money and put down a reservation to use, that sort of thing. There's a very large Starbucks with a lot of outside seating. But again, a public space has now been made exclusionary People have been, in this case, twice displaced through these closures, through these transformations that are often driven through the SDGs, SDG compliance, and this vision of Tokyo where no one is left behind. But clearly some people are being left behind. Many of those who were displaced by first Miyashita and then Mitake have had to search elsewhere or have simply just disappeared. We don't know entirely what happened to them. So lurking behind all of these closing, all of these shifts, are questions of what constitutes a park or public space, alongside policy decisions that are clearly antagonistic to Tokyo's unhoused and impoverished. Decisions that are also then reliant on particular depictions and references to the future that awaits. So my interest is in asking whose future is being depicted in all these places. Who is kept in mind? Who is selected? Who is erased? Who is emphasized? Who's denigrated when certain assertions like this are made? Who's getting left behind in a future that is said to be envisioned as one where no one will be left behind? So with that in mind, we'll make our another jump. If you've been in Japan, visiting Japan, residing in Japan, just invested in Japan for a while, you're likely familiar with some of what's up here. And I'm going to try to put all of these different steps in somewhat of an order to argue that one somewhat informs the other. There's been this, I would contend, ever-intensifying series of proposals and depictions of Japan and Tokyo's near future. They have grown in scale and scope from somewhat bounded to now quite vast. And they have also become increasingly contrived as they endeavor to assert a view of the future where pressing social concerns have been alleviated without addressing any of the underlying systemic dimensions that influence how those concerns took root. So let's start with Healthy Japan or Health Japan 21. And this one is actually really fantastic because one of our speakers last night mentioned this inadvertently as something he has to do. Health Japan 21 is an ongoing, it's now several decades old, public health initiative. It's rooted very much in neoliberal logics, cultivating greater individual responsibility, greater individual investment in one's health, while curtailing state provision of care. Essentially, it boils down to a lot of pleas, a lot of demands to stop smoking, to eat healthier, to drink less alcohol, to exercise more often. And sometimes that then comes with these ritualized acts of shaming that our speaker last night mentioned. The ministry will show up and measure people's waists, and if you are or are not in compliance with a certain number, you might be embarrassed a little bit. But what is absent in any of this is any effort to address, say, the ease of access to unhealthy foods or cigarettes or alcohol, the fact that you don't have enough time to exercise or get 8 hours of sleep or do any of these other things you are now being told it is your responsibility to do. And these programs have grown. We've gone from Healthy Japan in the early 2000s to then Innovation 25. Notice how there's usually a number or a year tied to this, where our window of focus increasingly widens. Healthy Japan 25 is very much invested in robots, and robots has in many ways the answer to a lot of our problems. James Wright, a fellow ethnographer, has written quite a lot about this, and he says, and I'll quote directly from him, the reality of actually developing and using care robots is far more complex than straightforward utopian visions of the future might suggest. We have a relatively succinct assertion that highlights the yawning gap between claims of a robotic-mediated future where all of these demographic, gendered, interpersonal concerns are now magically resolved, without any need to address systemic dimensions that have made these such grotesque areas of concern, of often debilitating anxiety. We get these claims of what's to come, and we get claims that grow more sweeping, but also more tidy in the resolutions that they promise. And that takes us to the big ones. We've heard a little bit about at least part of this earlier on this morning. Society 5.0 was launched in 2016. It is absolutely not out of date. And it was recently married to the SDGs as a way to sort of continue its relevance. All of these programs are often laden with a lot of jargon. We get super smart societies, we get big data, we get, an internet of things that will again resolve all of these concerns. There is all sorts of fascinating promotional material online if you want to go find this out. Some of it getting all the way down to a future of wearable simultaneous translation devices where you can not just understand the French and the Hindi and the Mandarin Chinese that your friends are speaking, but you can also now understand your dog. And your dog's barks will inform you where it wants to go. This is a screen capture from a video currently on the Prime Minister's Cabinet's official YouTube channel website. Which takes us back, though, to the SDGs. The SDGs are, in many ways, the latest iteration that keep this going. And they are the first thing that has gone from domestic to international. This is a global UN-backed initiative that has arguably found as much traction in Japan as it has found anywhere else in the world. But it's a program whose intent is to address very directly issues of poverty and inequality as driven by climate change, that in Japan have found their strongest manifestation as justification for new construction projects, redevelopment efforts, in many ways the opposite of what it's actually supposed to do. Which brings us back to some of the work that I have done with the unhoused and this moment of tension they're increasingly trapped within. A lot of outreach work in Japan has a fairly predictable characteristic to it. Takidashi, or food distribution, is one of the main activities. You make food, you make something that's relatively easy to pass between the volunteers and those in need. You hand it out. You do wellness checks, often around a established route where you know that people typically congregate. Maybe you try to build that up into something a little bit more robust. There are some very nascent housing first initiatives in Japan right now, that sort of thing. But sometimes you also try to do a bit more with it. One of the primary groups I work with is Sanyukai, what that says right there. Sanyukai is in Sanya, Minami Senju, so out in the northeast of the city, an area long regarded as a dangerous, dirty, frightening part of Tokyo. It was historically where day laborers would congregate, so people who worked on a daily basis. It has increasingly in recent years become what's referred to as a welfare village, because many of these men have now aged out of work and are struggling with all sorts of health issues. But a lot of these men also have no ties to extended family. They are homeless or marginally housed, and they are terrified of death. We've said several times death comes for us all. It comes for them in a more frightening way, because when they die, the city or the ward or whoever it is going to very aggressively try to track down any next of kin. And they very much don't want this to happen. So a group like Sanyukai has taken some interesting steps to relieve this. They have a temple, or they have a grave site at a Buddhist temple nearby. They have a butsudan, which I don't have a photo of because they said that was a little too much, inside their office. So again, not just future-oriented with this life, but now future-oriented into the next life. How can we help people move them forward, carry them onward in a way that actually has resonance and meaning for their lives, which can include things not just food, but also some rudimentary medical consultation, this sort of stuff. So to try to bring this to a close then, what I find particularly intriguing, but I also find deeply frustrating about my topic, is how so much of our future making has taken to obscuring and erasing those who could benefit the most from these often utopian renderings of what is to come. We get these wonderfully idealistic visions of the future that are put forward in all sorts of different ways against the dual reality of erasure for those who don't, to use the governor's words, shine, or who are removed in order to not sully any claims that Tokyo is leaving no one behind, alongside a situation, a reality of general harassment, denigration, and dismissal of the poor, the marginal, the unhoused, all creates an unacceptable and untenable tension that is made worse through willful disregard that emanates from all sorts of halls of power, including the governor's office. The very groups doing tangible things central to the SDGs that Koike claims are so important to her administration are also the very things that are being used to denigrate, to pave over, to eliminate the work and the places and the efforts that are being done to help these communities. That tension is untenable. It needs to be recognized and dealt with.